to our webinar today, where we are going to talk about what do patients and families want to know after medical harm. And really, it revolves around what you can see on the screen right now, the word candor. So let me start by giving you a little bit of background about myself. My name is Carol Hemmelgarn, and I have a master's degree from the University of Illinois Chicago in their Patient Safety Leadership Master's Program. I have a second master's from the University of Creighton in Healthcare Ethics, and the two of those go very well together. I teach at the University of Illinois Chicago in their Patient Safety and Leadership Program. And a lot of my focus in the patient safety field comes around communication and resolution programs, really advocating for patients. And you'll understand why as I go through this presentation. So just a few minutes, I'll let you look at what the objectives are here, and then we'll jump in. So everything that we talk about today is going to revolve around communication. Communication is the root of what we do in our personal lives and our professional lives. But in particular, communication is very important after patients or family members have been harmed by the healthcare system. What I want to start with is years ago, the Joint Commission used to put out a report, and it listed the sentinel events. And they quit presenting the data in the same way, or I would have shared this slide. But when you look back for 10 years, the three biggest reasons for sentinel events were always human factors, communication, and leadership. And what happened is those three were always the three ones. They just rotated as to which was number one, number two, or number three. So you can see how important communication is in the whole process when there has been harm. So let's start with AHRQ's CANDOR toolkit that was put out there about two and a half years ago. And I was part of this, as were many other stakeholders in putting this together. And I want to start just with the definition of candor, because that is, the definition says it's the quality of being open and honest in expression and frankness. And that's truly what patients and families want after harm, as well as caregivers. So when you look at the CANDOR model here, you can see that it's right away, having the harm identified through the reporting system. The system gets activated. There's communication right away with the patients and families, with providers. You investigate, and then there's resolution. And we'll talk more about that term resolution as we move forward. But this is AHRQ, the CANDOR model that's out there right now. This was based off of the 7 Pillars program, which originated at UIC. And, they had 7 pillars here, but those same pillars sort of roll into CANDOR. But what I want to focus on here is the event has to be reported, and that triggers the whole communication process. And as you can see, that's the centerpiece of any of these types of programs, is keeping that constant communication, openness, transparency. But the 7 Pillars program was based off the model of University of Michigan, which Rick Buchman did, and he based his off of Lexington VA, which Steve Cramen did. So why I wanted to show this is still an evolution. Each program has built on the next program, and it's important to know that even though we have the CANDOR toolkit out there, we're still improving. There's still ways to learn, and there's several programs out there. Stanford has their program with Pearl. Kaiser has a program. In Colorado, there's a program called the 3 Rs. All of them are sort of amalgamations of CRPs, but the important thing is having some kind of structured program in your organization. So what is important about these is that it is a bi-directional program, and that is that you have to be able to hear what the patients and families need to say as well. So let's jump into that. There's several studies out there that have looked at ECRI, the Harvard consensus that says, what do patients and families want to know after harm? Well, the first thing they want to know is, tell us what happened. And when they say that, it's what they want to know. It's not what you feel comfortable telling them or what you think they should know. It's what their needs are. And for some patients and families, it may be, answer these 3 questions and that's it. That's all I need. For others, it may be, hey, I want to know from the minute I walked in the door till the moment I left what happened in my care. The second important thing is take accountability. I cannot tell you how important this is because patients and families carry the guilt. If someone doesn't tell them what happened, they live in this world of what ifs. What if I'd have gone to another hospital? What if I'd have gotten a second opinion? What if when no one listened to me, I picked up the phone and I called 911 to get someone to respond? The third important thing, I think, are the 2 most powerful words in the English language, and that is, I'm sorry. It is so important for patients and families to hear those words, to feel that you generally are authentic and are sorry for what has happened to them. The fourth is tell them how you're going to fix the problem. Patients and families need to know that what happened to them or their loved ones won't happen to someone else. Because it does, it's as if the organization didn't learn, or perhaps their life was in vain. So when you look at the literature, those are the 4 key things. I actually believe there's a 5th one, and that's becoming more apparent, and that is let patients and families be part of the solution. They oftentimes want to, 1, make sure that the problem is fixed, or 2, they honor it. They do it to honor a loved one. So if a patient or family member wants to come and help you, you should look at that as a gift. They're willing to come back to the very organization that harmed them and want to be part of the solution. So I think it's always important to point this out. Physicians are most often sued not for bad care, but inept communication. So when you read the literature out there, there's all kinds of statistics about how long it takes to go to trial and things like that. So when you look at that, on average, 80% of the time, providers win the cases. Average case until it goes to trial, and often can still be settled prior to going to trial, is about 5.6 years. But the statistic I want you to remember most is when they ask patients and families why they sued, the number 1 reason is they didn't know what happened in their care. We don't have to go down this litigious process if we have communication and resolution programs where we're connecting with patients and families right away. We're being transparent. We're having honest communication, conversations. I also love this slide because oftentimes one of the barriers is patients and families don't feel like they ever get to tell their story after harm. So if you think about this, the patient and the family are usually the only ones there 24/7. They see the whole picture or the whole movie, if you want to say. Providers come in and out that revolving door and they only see pieces. So when a patient has been harmed, if we are not asking them what they saw in their care and getting their narrative, we're not getting the whole story. And we're missing key learning opportunities. So we need to make sure we are listening to them. The other point I wanted to bring out about the word silent is when we are having some of these difficult conversations, it's okay to be silent. Sometimes patients and families need to digest some of the things they're hearing. So we as healthcare providers have to learn how to sit in silence. and how to be okay with that awkwardness sometimes, just to let patients and families absorb the words and the things that we're sharing with them. So what are the consequences if we don't have these conversations? And the consequences can be for both the patients and families and also the providers. So guilt, both patients and families and providers feel guilty. Feeling of abandonment. When the healthcare system walks away after these events, the patients and families often don't even know what to do. They feel abandoned. They have no idea what they should be feeling. It is the inability to heal. If you don't know what has happened in yours or a loved one's care, it's very, very difficult to move forward. There's frustration, and as you can see, I've bolded anger, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in an upcoming slide. For clinicians, it definitely heightens their distress, plus it's the same feelings that the patients and families suffer, mentioned above, they feel. They are concerned about litigation. It's a huge loss to the system because we are not learning when we're not communicating. And these events are bound to happen again if we're not learning from them. It can impact the whole culture, and it can impact the community, as you can see. So a couple years ago, I did a presentation out for the Oregon Patient Safety Coalition. And I did one of these wordles, and I put up the question, what do you think the emotions are that patients and families feel after harm? And as you can see on the wordle, several words are there, but the more people that put the same word, the bigger the word appears. And you can see the word anger there. So we're going to come back to this. I then put up the question, what are the emotions you feel that providers feel after harm? And again, you can see on the screen, guilt comes up, fear, shame. What's interesting with this is that when you ask patients and families, so remember the audience was where I asked these two questions were providers. The word that doesn't come up as big for patients and family is anger. It's guilt or shame or sadness or loss or disbelief. What you're seeing here is anger is oftentimes what providers are projecting because they do feel guilty about things and they think patients and families will be angry. I'm not saying it's not an emotion, but it's not often the biggest emotion that patients and families feel. Sometimes it's disbelief. They don't even know how to process this. So what we have to be careful is, as providers, we're not projecting our discomfort onto what patients and families actually feel. And this is a very big awakening to the providers when we went through this and talked about this. So this slide just is, what ECRI puts out there in the Harvard consensus. And I'm going to talk about some words we should probably move away from in the whole communication and resolution process. And one is moving from disclosure to the word communication. Because communication is bidirectional. Disclosure sounds like it's a one-time event and I'm going to tell you this and all will be good. Some other words, so as you can see here on my slide that words matter, and they really do, is using the term communication instead of disclosure. Then you can see restitution, resolution, reparation, reconciliation. When patients and families are harmed, there is never any resolution. It's always there. It does not go away. So, sometimes people are like, well, we've got to get over the words, and it can be very difficult, but it's just knowing how certain words may trigger certain reactions in patients and families. And I sit and I do work with the Collaborative for Accountability Improvement, and, we call these communication and resolution programs, and we're trying to figure out, Do we change that, or do we just address that we realize there is not a resolution for patients and families? Using the term event review instead of investigation. Investigation has a negative connotation when you're going to go to a provider and say, hey, we need you to come in and, we're going to sort of do this investigation. It puts people on edge right away. Moving from interview to we're just going to have a conversation. We want to learn what happened. And then finally, the term second victim to more of care for the caregiver, or some are saying, caring for the traumatized provider, whatever. Second victim is a term that some patients are like, well, if my loved one, is the victim, then it sort of diminishes to say that there's a second victim in the providers and a third victim in the organization, and that patients and families believe in the concept that you have to care for providers. It just is the vernacular, the term victim. So just think about that. You are going to care for the caregiver or have a care for the caregiver type program. So one of the key things to realize as well is that when harm occurs, it is a process. It's not an event. This isn't just we'll have one conversation and we're done. Conversations can take weeks, months, and sometimes even years. And I cannot stress that the conversation doesn't end until the patient or the family sense that it ends. And that is because sometimes they have to get the information, they have to process it, and then they may have more questions that come up and they want to come back and get those answered. It is very difficult for patients and families, and there's a lot of emotion around this when it's a sentinel event, and they have to find a place to put this in their heart after harm has occurred. So both go through the whole mental and physical and emotional aspects of it. So I want to sort of end this presentation because I do want to connect the head and the heart. And I want you to understand how I truly know what patients and families need after harm. There's a pain scale out there, and you can see it on the screen, different things that impact the whole population, from minor slights to betrayal, death of a parent. But on the pain scale, one of the most difficult things to deal with is the loss of a child. I'm going to introduce you. This is my 9-year-old daughter, Alyssa. And I got involved in this work because my 9-year-old daughter, Alyssa, died due to multiple medical errors. So when I say I know how patients and families feel, I have actually experienced this. In the organization where my daughter died, it took 3 years, 7 months, and 28 days to have the first honest conversation with me, and that is no way to treat any human being. That is why I am such a proponent of having a structured communication and resolution program, because we need to be at the bedside as soon as harm has occurred. We need to be talking to patients and families. They need to have a card of who they can connect with at any time. They need to be told, you're going to talk to them in a week as you find out more information, and you call them in a week and you tell them what you know, and you stay connected to them so they don't feel abandoned. It is very difficult to carry the guilt, because as parents, our one role is to protect our children. And when we don't know what has happened, we feel that we've failed them and we carry the guilt. that we let them down, and in some cases that we killed them. So having conversations with patients and families is the most critical thing after harm has occurred. And I want to add, in caring for your care providers, we have to stop separating patients and families and the care providers and make sure that they heal in tandem, because they suffer many of the same emotions, and keeping that connectivity and trust, it helps everyone, it helps the learning, and it helps the system if we don't separate the two entities that have been harmed. So my whole point of this brief presentation is it's really about compassion. It's about benevolence. It's about doing the right thing and having those difficult conversations, but those empathic and important conversations when harm has happened. And realize some conversations are going to be simpler because the harm is not as severe. Some are going to be very difficult, especially when there's the loss of life that's involved. But it's about being humane and treating people with respect so that they can try to move forward and heal in the best manner that they can after these harm events transpire. So I'm going to pause now, and if there are questions, please put them into the chat. I am happy to answer whatever I can. There's not many people out there like me who actually understand the healthcare system, do work in here, but have actually experienced this, so know what it's like on the other side. So I want to answer anything I can if people do have questions. I am going to turn it over to Sean so that as you're thinking, he can talk a little bit about the program, and then I'll see what kind of questions come up in the chat. So Sean, if you want to go ahead and jump in, please feel free.
Yes, I will do so, and thank you, Carol. Great presentation, very moving. And yes, please, everyone, do go ahead and begin to type your questions in. As Carol had mentioned, she is a faculty member and instructor for the Patient Safety Leadership Program, and we have sort of been putting on these webinars really since the fall. And I know a number of you, it looks like, in terms of who's here, have come to a few of these. But really, what we're trying to do is demonstrate the breadth of knowledge and experience that our faculty have in the online patient safety leadership programs here at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And essentially, we talk about the programs, but here's what they are. We do offer a Master of Science in Patient Safety Leadership program, which is really 9 courses, and it typically is taking students between 18 to 20 months to complete. It is entirely online, other than the 3-day residency that happens here in Chicago, where you're essentially getting what we call the capstone project, your final project that you complete. Really from the beginning, you're sort of thinking about that all the way through to your graduation. We also offer really the Patient Safety Leadership Certificate program, which is essentially the first 3 courses of the master's program, and that's a lot of times people will start in a certificate program prior to actually moving on to the master's, but you can know that essentially if you do those courses and do well, those will typically transfer in if you choose to move on to the master's program, as long as really you've gotten a B or better in those courses. That really is, the courses are all 8 weeks long, so that takes about 24 weeks to complete if you were to do that, and it is entirely online because it's prior to the on-site residency portion. Here's a little bit, a quick slide, and I know there's a lot on this slide, but it shows a little bit of what people are doing in terms of the capstone projects. Carol, I'll bring you in. What did you do your capstone project on as you were doing the program?
So mine is actually right at the top of the list. I am a big supporter of narratives in healthcare because patients tell us their stories in the form of, what happened to them. And so my capstone was researching how patients tell their stories and how we develop them to help tell their stories. And I did a lot of it around telling my story in vignettes and what happened to my daughter to use them as teaching tools.
No, that's great. So then I'll kind of have you put your faculty hat on then too. What's been kind of an interesting project that you've seen or heard of being done from one of the current students or recent graduates?
There's a lot of interest right now, Sean, from on caring for the caregiver program. Mm-hmm. So I've seen a colleague of mine, Teresa Morris, out of Brigham and Women's, worked on that. I've seen others start to do some stuff on resiliency, which sort of ties into that. One of my other colleagues was one of the ones that did some work in the NICU because she was a neonatologist. So what's great is it's sort of, find what your passion is because it's the project that sticks with you. And a lot of people like to do it that it may help where they work in their organization. Mm-hmm. And there's so many different areas out there that need assistance. So we love when people come up with creative ideas.
Yeah. And we hope that this slide kind of gives everybody sort of an understanding of what the breadth of the different types of projects that there are and have been to give ideas. And this really just shows you this is sort of the different areas that people are coming to us from. And we put the ones in bold on the front, but really if you look behind those bold, that's all the different types of both clinicians, non-clinicians, different positions that people have that have done the degree. And so again, we really do view this as a sort of an interprofessional program where you are interacting with people that from all different areas of healthcare in all different situations, and that's some of the power I think of the program as well.
Yeah, it was. I can say my cohort that I went through. We had physicians, we had nurses, we had chief quality officer, and then I was one of the first patients to go through it, but I had a healthcare background in a different sense. And we encourage everybody and anybody. Teaching it now, I've had lawyers. We have a lot of PharmDs that come through. Mm-hmm. We've had people in curriculum. So it's nice when we have a robust cohort with a bunch of different perspectives because it just enhances the learning.
No, it really, really does. So really, that's kind of everything, that we go over. If really, we're going to open it up for questions here. If anybody has it, it doesn't seem like anybody's typed thus far, but either questions about the program, questions for Carol. We kind of scheduled for half an hour, but we'll stay on here for a little bit and see if anybody actually ends up having a question or whatnot. But again, there's our contact information. And then if you did have questions for Carol, you can always send those our way, and we can forward those on to Carol as well, sort of after the presentation. But yeah, any other questions? Any questions that anybody has? And we usually do a little pause here, right, Carol, to go 1, 2, 3, see if anybody if anybody actually
Absolutely.
Types. For me, we did get one chat here just saying thank you for the great presentation. So you're welcome.
Well, you are. Thank you.
Okay, here we go. So, from Rose, are physicians afraid of losing their jobs if they are sued and therefore reluctant to speak about any error?
Yeah, there definitely is a loss. There is a fear of a loss of job, but oftentimes when you have these kind of programs implemented or in place, is you have the support from leadership. And I can tell you that most patients and families don't want providers to lose their job. They realize that these mistakes are accidents. As you've heard other people in these webinars say, is no one comes to work with the intention to harm. So I can say, too, that it depends where you are culturally. In the United States, you know, it's a safer environment. I do a lot of work internationally, and the environments aren't always as safe, and oftentimes providers in different countries can lose their jobs, but in the U.S., that's not the goal. The goal is to learn and fix the problem, you know, and it's physicians aren't out there usually doing reckless behavior. As one of my other faculty colleagues, Laura, did a presentation on, you know, what is reckless behavior, what isn't. Most physicians and nurses and PharmDs, it's not reckless behavior. It's just, it's an event that happened.
Okay. Suzanne has a question. Do you find legal concerns prohibit the discussions? So similar, yeah.
Well, so yes, because, you know, there's malpractice in carriers. And the big thing we're seeing right now is when there's academic institutions, most of the academic institutions, there's sort of the corporate shield that physicians fall under. So it's been easier to start these kind of programs because physicians are worried about the National Practitioner Data Bank. What we're seeing as more systems that aren't academic, so systems like MedStar and Kaiser and things like that, sometimes you have multiple malpractice carriers. And while some may say, we're on board, let's talk about this, you may have others that say, no, we're not. And so it's trying to really now work with the malpractice carriers to say, let's do these programs because we can save cost if we do and learn from them to prevent harm. So our next iteration is just educating the carriers on this, and then we have to get it down to the plaintiff lawyers and the defense lawyers. So, you know, we're moving forward. We have more malpractice carriers that have implemented programs like Beta Health out in California. But that's where we got to get to, is that it doesn't go to litigation, that we can have resolution, restitution that doesn't have to go to trial, that make the patients and families whole.
No, thank you, Carol. And thank you for the question, Suzanne. Any other questions? Another question, is the main issue in harm negligence or just human error?
You know, I think it's more human error than negligence. If you look at the data, very rarely is it reckless behavior or negligence. It's really about system errors, which is a lot of time what happens. Oftentimes behind those systems are humans, but it's not anything with malice that drives this, because you see how bad providers feel after this harm has occurred. I mean, you can see the data out there, and they suffer greatly because of this. So definitely not negligence.
Okay, I know we're getting towards the end of the time here, or a little bit over, but any other questions? Well, I'm not seeing any more here. I'll have one question here, Carol. What would you say overall, right? You've been involved in the program on both sides. What's been your biggest takeaway from the program? Just in general. I know that's a very broad question, but because there's a lot of specificity we talk about here, but maybe just to leave everybody with something along those lines.
So being an adjunct professor, and now I continue to learn from the students in the class. And I absolutely love the online discussions because you can see those aha moments when things sink in or trigger or the light bulb goes on. And I think that's one of the best things about online learning is people aren't afraid to have a voice and, you know, put things in the chat and have these robust conversations. So being on the student end, going through it, I loved it, and I continue now as a professor because I actively engage and see that we are all learning and growing together. And there's still so much to learn in healthcare that it's by far not a stagnant degree at all. I mean, we are continuing to learn more and more about patient safety.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's what we hear a lot of times, right? I'd love this just to continue forever and always, right? The conversations that occur because they are so rich when you're talking about the people that are coming together to have these conversations that are really part of the program, both on the instructor side and faculty side as well as the student side. So no, I appreciate that answer. And sorry for putting you on the spot there a little bit, but that was a great answer.
That's all right. Well, Sean, I want to thank you for this opportunity and everyone that joined in. And if there's ever any questions, I am happy. So, you know, feel free to reach out to myself or Sean, and I'll assist in any way I can.
You bet, yes. And again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carol, for such a great presentation. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And as Carol said, any questions, feel free to email, and we'll get you an answer. But everybody have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye.